Hey guys and gals, this is the Bar Exam and Chill podcast. I'm your host TJ. Today we've got an essay question from the July 2021 UBE bar exam. And we're going to go into the questions, read them first, see what we can garner. That will typically tell us, hopefully, what topic we're in and what to look out for as we go through the hypo. So we got question number 1. Under the applicable standard of care, are the facts sufficient for a jury to find that the son acted negligently? Explain. Number 2. Under the applicable standard of care, are the facts sufficient for a jury to find that Big Box acted negligently? Explain. Number 3. Can the customer be held liable for enhancing the son's injury? Explain. And number 4. Assuming that only Big Box and the customer were negligent and can be held liable, can the son recover the full amount of damages from Big Box only? Explain. Do not address the effect of any Good Samaritan statute. Okay, so obviously when the bar exam tells us not to do something, we should pay attention. But we've looked through these questions. We've got 3 main players that we're going to be looking at as we go through the hypo. We've got the son, Big Box, and customer. We're worried about their actions, so we're going to pay special attention to them. And it's asking us if people are negligent. Therefore, we should be able to garner that we're in a torts hypo, and we should gear ourselves towards that topic as we go through. So let's go through the hypo. A mother was shopping with her 6-year-old son at Big Box store. The son was visually impaired, so his mother, concerned about crowding and jostling by other patrons, restrained him by placing her hand on his shoulder and instructed him to remain in her grasp. Despite his mother's efforts, the son broke free of her grasp and ran toward a nearby candy display. Because he was running and visually impaired, the son did not notice some cheesecake on the floor in the store's self-serving dining area. The cheesecake was flattened and dirty. The son slipped on the cheesecake and fell to the floor, suffering physical injury. Another customer unsuccessfully attempted to help the son to stand, worsening the son's injury by negligently twisting his arm. Big Box had in place a policy instructing employees to take steps to promptly clean known hazards on the floor, but it did not assign an employee to monitor floor conditions. Big Box employees do not know when any employee had most recently inspected the floor or when the floor had been last cleaned. The self-serve dining area includes displays that contain takeout food, including cheesecake. These displays had last been stocked several days before the son slipped on the cheesecake. On the day the son slipped and fell, a store employee had walked by the self-serve dining area before the son slipped but had not noticed the cheesecake on the floor. The mother has filed a negligence claim on her son's behalf against Big Box and the customer who attempted to help the son. Both Big Box and the customer claim that the son was negligent. All right, so we move into question 1. This is about the son. Can the son be found negligent? So this is everybody should probably know this from law school. So our issue here is whether a 6-year-old who is visually impaired can be found negligent for running in a store and falling to avoid or when he slipped on the cheesecake. Our rule is like the most famous rule in all of law school, probably the Torts negligence standard. 1, duty. 2, breach. 3, causation. And here you should include both proximate and actual causation. And 4, damages. So there's your 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. That's pretty clear. We've got a special case here that we're going to be tested on. The issue is whether the 6-year-old who is visually impaired can be found negligent for running and slipping on a cheesecake. So we go through our elements. That's going to be our... You want to focus heavily on one of the most applicable elements usually. You want to try and focus in on whatever the important one is, but you still want to lay out all the rule standards, 1, 2, 3, 4, duty, breach, causation, damages, and go through each one quickly, right? So what's our duty here? Well, we're analyzing under the son who's got this visual impairment. So generally, a duty is everyone owes a duty to act as a reasonably prudent person would under a similar circumstance. That's general duty. There's your magic phrase that you have to memorize for the bar exam. Everyone owes a duty to act as a reasonably prudent person would under similar circumstances. Now, we've actually got 2 things to worry about here. It's a child, so they're a minor. There's going to be sort of a different standard there, and also he's visually impaired. So they threw both of us at it, both of these exception or kind of alternate circumstances at us that we're going to have to deal with. So For children, duty is going to be slightly modified from that standard of generally everyone owes a duty to act as a reasonably prudent person would. The son is going to owe a duty to act with the care of a child of like age, intelligence, and experience. There's our duty standard in torts for minors. You have to act with the care of a child of like age, intelligence, and experience. So hopefully we can remember rule of threes. For a child, you've got age, intelligence, and experience. You got to consider those. All right, so we've got our rule as duty, and how does breach get analyzed here? Well, breach occurs when a party fails to meet the applicable standard of care. We've got two standards of care here. You got child of like age, intelligence, and experience, and also he has a physical disability, so I guess we should put that up in duty. The standard of care for a person with a physical disability is that of a reasonable person with the same disability. So you've got two things here. Like a child of his age, intelligence, and experience, and like a person with a physical disability, a visual impairment in this case. So we've got our standard of care. We're going to analyze, did the son breach the applicable standards of care? We go into our facts. Here, the son is 6 years old and visually impaired. Those are the key facts. The standard is thus that of a reasonable 6-year-old of similar maturity, intelligence, and experience who is also visually impaired. There's your standard. So we would state that in our rule. And here we would analyze, could a jury find that the son reasonably breached his applicable standard of care here? And maybe this could go either way. So we would do, in this one, I would really focus on trying to nail down arguments on both sides because it seems like there's going to be some facts for both. So let's see, could a jury find breach? Well, they may be able to find breach because it says that the mother had placed her hand on his shoulder and instructed him to remain in her grasp due to concerns about the crowding. And he broke free and ran towards, the candy display. As a visually impaired child, he knew, or he reasonably should have known, perhaps, or he should have appreciated, that he could not see obstacles or hazards on the floor, and he took off running. So you would probably assume that in his past, he's probably had problems if he just runs off and he can't see anything. Running in a crowded retail environment increases the risk of collision or slipping, especially for someone who cannot visually scan for dangers. But we also kind of want to consider that, on the other hand, he is a child, so maybe he doesn't appreciate risk very well. He's 6 years old. That's pretty young. Can he appreciate the risk of running in a store? He probably doesn't have a lot of experience, right? So we're analyzing under his age, intelligence, and experience. Well, 6-year-olds are not very intelligent. So they probably may be more likely to do something like this. You run from your mom's hand. A jury may be able to find that, because he was a kid, he may not have appreciated. He saw some candy. It seems like kids of his in his age and intelligence and experience would be excited by candy, and they may momentarily have a lapse in judgment and run and break free from their mother. He's visually impaired, so maybe we should say, how would somebody with a visual impairment in a like situation act? Would they just take off running? Probably not, because they understand they're visually impaired. They may need help, or they may need to rely on other people. So that he kind of maybe breached that standard of care. Maybe as a kid, he did disobey his mother. So we may be able to argue that, other kids in his like age, intelligence, and experience would understand that you have to listen to your mother. So I could see your conclusion not being the most important on this one. As long as you're analyzing under the applicable standard of care, you've gone through duty and breach here. You could probably go either way on this one. The conclusion might be that, yes, he did breach the standard of care. A child of like age and experience who is visually impaired would not have broken away from their mother's grasp and run off. So therefore, he has breached and is negligent. Or, let's cut him some slack. I mean, he's a kid. He saw some candy. Other kids of his like age, intelligence, and experience would be excited and maybe would momentarily forget. So we can't really put that on him. You may go either way on this one. I feel like both have pretty solid arguments. When it's close like this, you just want to make sure that you analyze under the applicable standards that you're supposed to be looking at, and then come to your own conclusion here. So we've got duty, breach. We went through those. Causation. If a breach is found, then it was the actual cause, right? Because but for his running, he would have slipped. So actual cause, we do but for test. But for his running, he wouldn't have slipped, and it would have been the proximate cause, which is analyzed under foreseeability. Slipping is a foreseeable result of running in a store, especially if you're visually impaired and you're a child. They're a little bit wobbly, 6 years old. So we've got duty, breach, causation. Yeah, I mean, it was the cause, actual and proximate of the breach was the cause of his damages. Was he damaged here? Final prong here. Yeah, it says in the facts that he suffered a physical injury. So we've got potentially duty, breach, causation, and damages. The only thing that you're going to bobble back and forth on is, did he actually breach his duty? You could probably go either way there, and then you just come to your conclusion. Yes, he was negligent, and a jury could find that he was negligent, or no, he is a child, and they are kind of dumb, and we cut him some slack. Either way, probably okay there. All right, question 2. We've got big box's negligence. So the issue here, IRAC, issue, rule, application, conclusion, whether big box breached its duty of care to a business invitee regarding a dangerous floor condition. So we're going to go over this a little bit after we answer the question. We've got these different standards, these different duties of care that are very heavily tested. This is a high yield rule. You're going to see this stuff on the MBE and the essay section. So it's really important to understand all the distinctions here. But we've got our issue. Did they breach the duty of care to a business invitee regarding a dangerous floor condition? Well, what's our rule? We're going to analyze under the duty to invitees. So what's that? A business invitee, which is the son and the mother, right? They're customers. They're coming into the store to shop. They are owed a duty of reasonable care to maintain the premises in a reasonably safe condition. And this includes a duty to inspect for or discover and remedy or warn of dangerous conditions that the owner knows or should have known about through the exercise of reasonable care. So that's kind of a long thing for our standard, but basically we just have to know, if you're an invitee, you have a duty of reasonable care to maintain the premises in a reasonably safe condition. And then what does that mean? You have a duty to inspect. If you just remember those, you're probably going to be fine, right? But you've got to actually look out and either remedy the situation or warn of it, right? Like put a sign there saying, hey, watch out, there's some cheesecake on the floor, or just clean up the cheesecake. Those are your two options. You've got a duty to inspect. You have to keep it reasonably safe for the people that are coming in. You have that's the highest level of duty, and they frequently test this on the MBE. I think this came up multiple times on both the bar exams that I took. So we want to know, what is the duty to an invitee? In a slip and fall case, liability often turns on notice, which is actual or constructive, of the hazard, and a failure to clean or warn within a reasonable time. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. We're analyzing, did big box breach its duty of care? So breach, the plaintiff has to show that the owner had actual notice or constructive notice that the condition existed for such a length of time that the owner should have discovered it, right? Because you have this duty to inspect, and everything is analyzed under like reasonable duty of care, right? So it has to be within a reasonable time that you're operating your store, you're going around to search out these kind of things and inspect on behalf of your customers. So let's apply our rule to this hypo. Big box may have no actual notice, as the employee, it mentioned in the facts that the employee who walked by didn't see it. So they may not have actual notice of the cheesecake being on the floor. That would be extra bad, right? If the employee walked by and saw the dirty cheesecake and was just like, fuck it, I'm lazy, I don't even want to deal with that, just whatever, it's just a little dirt, who cares? Then the store would be on actual notice. The facts give us here that the employee didn't see it, so they don't have actual notice, but we may argue that there's constructive notice here, right? It gave us that the time was really long. Let's go into our facts here. It says that the cheesecake was flattened and dirty. That means it probably is not a fresh piece of cheesecake that had recently fallen on the floor. We could notice that. That suggests that it's been there for a pretty long time, right? It says Big Box had no system for inspecting the floors, basically. They didn't actually have any like routine for people to go around and check. So that's a strike against Big Box there. And it said that it had been like days since they had restocked the cheese box or the cheesecake. So it may have been there for days, in which case definitely Big Box would have had a duty affirmatively to go around and inspect and to have found the cheesecake. A lot of facts here are lining up against Big Box. So it says that premises owners, if it's just kind of a single slip up, it's a transitory spill that happened and it's in a reasonable amount of time, they didn't find it, then it may be okay, right? It's analyzed under that reasonable standard, which is a little bit fuzzy. So if it had just been like the cheesecake, somebody had just barely dropped it on the floor, nobody had notice of it, none of the employees would have known because it was like seconds ago, and they have they're going around checking, it's just they didn't get it in time, and the child just happened to have broken away from his mother and ran off and slipped on it just after it fell, then obviously in that case it's a different story and they may not be found to have breached their duty. But here you've got no monitoring system. It sounds like the cheesecake's been dirty and on the floor for a really long time, in which case they should have had somebody going around to inspect and find it under the applicable standard of care here. So it looks like Big Box has breached its duty of care to business invitees. It has an affirmative duty to inspect. It looks like it has breached that duty here. So is it, then we go through quickly causation. Yes, but for the breach and but for their lack of inspecting, they would have found basically the kid would not have slipped on it if they had gone around and inspected and cleaned it up or warned about it. So, but for the breach, causation. Proximate cause, is it foreseeable that you not having a monitoring system and, handling cheesecake and not inspecting, is it foreseeable that somebody may slip on and fall? Yeah, that's pretty foreseeable. So we go duty, breach, causation, damages. Are there damages? Well, there's a physical injury. So again, you just can, if there's not a lot to say on one of these prongs, you just sort of go, look, yeah, there's physical injury, there's damages, boom, that's it. One sentence is enough. You get your points. You don't want to spend all day analyzing some stuff that's pretty clear. So you can see here on this hypo, it happens to be that a bulk of our analysis, the important stuff, is going to go into the breach and explicating the rule or the standard of care. So if we've set up our standard of care, we've accurately described the rule, and then we've gone into breach and we go, look, you could argue this, you could argue that, looks like it's going to be blah, blah, blah. Then you've got just one sentence throwaways for causation and damages. You don't have a lot of arguments there. So yes, there's causation. Yes, there's damages. Conclusion. Yes, Big Box could be found negligent for breaching its applicable standard of care. Boom. We've nailed it. That's kind of all you have to do there. And remember, this is not a creative writing exercise. I literally on my bar exams would just go, the issue here is blah, blah, blah. The rule here is blah, 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 right? I don't think I said application, but then you just apply it. And how do you apply? Every single time. You don't even have to think about it. You just go, here, facts, and then conclusion. Every single time you're going through all these questions, and that's your formula. You're just sticking everything into that formula. It's nice and easy. You don't have to think. You're literally going, the issue here is blah, blah, blah. The rule is blah, blah, blah. Here, facts, conclusion. Bam! For every essay, you're just doing that over and over again, and you're just slotting in, right? You got to memorize all the rules. That's the key. And then you're going, your elements. 1, 2, 3, 4. Duty, breach, causation, proximate, and actual damages. If you've got all that memorized, you're going to be set up. You're going to spot the issues. You're going to kill it on exam day. Let's go through these different standards of care that they like to test on the bar exam. So you've got the lowest duty is for a trespasser. And they have a trespasser, which the definition is if somebody enters or remains on land or premises without permission, express or implied, and without legal privilege. So sometimes they analyze those cases where like somebody is about to die and out of necessity they enter. There's like a little bit of nuance there. But typically, if you're entering or remaining on land or premises without permission, express or implied, you're going to be a trespasser, and the person who owns the land has the lowest duty of care towards you. So what is that duty of care? Well, for an undiscovered trespasser, right, if they have no idea that somebody's on the land, then the person basically owes you almost no duty. They only have to avoid willful or wanton malicious conduct or setting traps, basically, right? So in law school, they always talk about the spring gun when you have like a shotgun that points at a door. So if somebody opens it, they get blasted in the crotch or whatever. Vicious dogs, and you unleash them knowing. You just basically can't like try and kill somebody that's on your land. So that's a pretty low duty. As long as you're not doing that, you're not breaching anything, right? So for undiscovered trespassers, you basically owe them almost no duty. You just can't try and kill them. You do not have a duty to inspect or warn. You don't even have to warn. You don't even have to have a sign up. Just if you don't know about the trespasser, all you got to do is just not try and kill that person. So if it's a person who's discovered or known, or an anticipated trespasser, right? You have like a land that's somewhere where people are commonly walking that might cross into your fence and do stuff. It's like you should anticipate that people might, be a little bit trespassy. Then you have a duty to warn or make safe, known, concealed, artificial conditions that create unreasonable risk of serious harm. So you've got like things that are super dangerous that you know about, right? If you don't know about it, you don't have to warn about it. But if you do know there's like some giant pit with stakes at the bottom, and if you fall in, you get impaled and die, like it's like an old Vietnam trap or something, you just have to put up a sign that says, hey, watch out for the Vietnam death trap over there. And that's all you've got as far as the duty goes. So if you're a trespasser, the person just basically has to make sure, if you're undiscovered, that they don't kill you, and if you are discovered or anticipated, that the stuff on the land that they know about that can kill people, they just put up a sign and warn you. Now, I just want to touch on, there is this special rule in the trespasser domain that's commonly tested for MBEs, the attractive nuisance doctrine. This is typically for child trespassers. If there's like a trampoline or like Neverland Ranch for Michael Jackson, he's got like giraffes and roller coasters. If there's something that kids would see and they'd be like, holy shit, I gotta go like play with the giraffe or whatever, then the landowner has a little bit more of a nuanced rule here. Landowners are going to be liable if, one, artificial conditions likely to attract children are on the land. Two, the owner knows or should know that children are around and that they may trespass. Three, that the child can't appreciate the danger. They'll be excited by it, right? And four, the expense of remedying is slight compared to the risk. Then you will have an actual affirmative duty to go ahead and remedy a little bit more, right? Because we're trying to protect children. So firefighters and police often are treated as licensees and they have limited recovery, right? That's the firefighters rule. They're expected to assume some danger. So unfortunately for the firefighters and the police, they have a little bit of a different nuanced rule for trespassing. All right. What's our second and our middle? There's only three designations here, right? You got number one, lowest duty, trespasser. We went through that. Two, licensees. That's your middle duty. And how are they defined? Well, if you enter with permission, express or implied, before the licensee's own purpose or benefit, not the landowner's. The classic example is like a social guest. You're having a party. You invite people over for dinner. Another one is if you have somebody coming to like take a read of your meter or whatever, like if it's like a gas or electric issue and they're coming in to read your meter, that would be like a licensee. Those are designated in this middle duty of licensee. Typically on the bar exam, you're just going to see it as like a party guest. And all right, what duty do you owe here to your licensee? You've got a duty of reasonable care in conducting activities on the land. You don't have an affirmative duty to inspect, right? For a licensee, you just have a duty of reasonable care in conducting activities. So for dangerous conditions, you have a duty only to warn if you know about it. Let's see. Concealed dangers. That's the thing. Okay, so you don't have a duty to like inspect to find unknown dangers, right? But you do have a duty to warn or make safe known. You have actual knowledge, concealed dangers. If there's like a spike under the floor and I guess one of the examples that you might use, let's say that I have parties at my house all the time, and last night I got really fucked up and I went over to vomit on the stairs and I just like puked all over one of the stairs. I know it's there. I didn't black out. I'm just like, oh, I don't want to clean that up. That's gross. I just leave it there. If I have another party and I invite people over, then I should tell them if they're going to, if I know they're about to walk up to go use the bathroom or whatever, like, hey, watch out, it's slippery, I accidentally puked on the stairs last night. You would have a duty to just say, heads up, there's like this unreasonable concealed danger maybe. I mean, obviously, that's pretty obvious, I guess. Maybe that's not the best example. But if there's like a floorboard that commonly it's weak and it could break and like you could break your leg on it and you know about it, then you just got to let people, give them a heads up, right? You do not have a duty to inspect for like dangers that you don't know about. That's the whole distinction here. For a licensee, if you know that there's like a concealed danger, you just got to give people a heads up. And then we already did our invitee, but that's our highest duty. So we've got trespasser, licensee, invitee. Invitee, we went through that. That's your highest duty of care. You actually have to inspect. That's typically if you're like a business and you're having customers on. That's for the landowner's benefit, right? It's, it could be a mutual benefit, I guess. Enters for a purpose of mutual benefit to the landowner and the entrant. Typically, the example is a customer in a store. It could be a public invitee. This would be land held open to the public, like a museum, a church, during services, or like a public park, maybe. And your duty of care is your duty of reasonable care to keep premises reasonably safe. You got to inspect, you got to warn, and make safe for the people that are coming on. Things that you know or should have known about. You've got your highest duty there. All right, so we've nailed down all that nuance for the bar exam. Let's go into question 3 here. What is our issue? Well, our issue is it's asking us whether a person who voluntarily renders aid can be held liable for worsening an injury. Now, if we remember in our facts, it actually just straight up says to us that he negligently held the child's arm and caused damage, right? So when it says negligently, you're not going to go through this whole duty breach causation damages analysis, right? It just gives us he did it negligently. So you want to pay attention for that kind of stuff on the bar exam. If it's just telling you that like a rule is met or something, then you don't want to do any analysis on that because you're not going to get any points. Yeah, it's negligently. You don't have to analyze it because they tell you right in the hypo. So our issue here is, can a person who voluntarily renders aid and acts negligently be held liable for worsening the injury? Our rule is going to be 3 things we kind of want to worry about here. I mean, you have an assumption of duty. That just means if you voluntarily attempt to aid somebody, even if not legally required to do so, you have to exercise reasonable care in the performance of that aid. So there's no duty to rescue generally. I mean, if you walk by and somebody's like drowning, you technically don't have to. This is like in some jurisdictions, right? And there may be a Good Samaritan law, which it tells us not to talk about. So we're not going to fucking talk about that in our essay. We're going to totally ignore that. But just so you're aware, like typically you don't have a duty to rescue. You can just walk by and let the person drown. There may be a Good Samaritan law in some states where they actually give you an affirmative duty to help if you know somebody's like dying or something. It tells us not to analyze that. For this question, we're not going to. So we're just going to say, person voluntarily rendering aid, can they be held liable? Well, you have an assumption of duty, right? If you're voluntarily attempting to help somebody, you do have to exercise reasonable care in performing that aid. You can't perform aid negligently. If you decide to wade into the waters and help somebody, you have to do it as a reasonably prudent person would. So you've got that assumption of duty. Breach. If the rescuer fails to act as a reasonably prudent person would in rescuing and increases the harm, they are liable for the increment of harm that they cause. So there's our kind of 2-prong rule here. 3, causation. The rescuer is liable only for the enhancement of the injury caused, not for the entire everything that happened, right? In rendering aid, if they caused harm, they're liable only for that amount of harm that they caused when they were rendering aid. The underlying injury, they're not going to be held liable for. So there's our rule, right? If you wade in and you decide to rescue, you have to act as a reasonably prudent rescuer would. If you do breach, then you're going to be held liable only for the amount of only for the amount of harm that you caused in trying to rescue the person. And that's our rule. So we apply it to this hypo, right? This customer comes over to the kid. He grabs his arm and negligently fucks up the kid's arm. So in attempting to help the son, it just gives us he was negligent. So did he act as a reasonably prudent person would under our rule? No, he was negligent. So he fails. So can he be held liable? Yes, he can be held liable for worsening the injury. For the amount of damage that he caused, like probably to the kid's arm, right, when he twisted it or whatever, hurt the kid's arm. So there you go. Boom. That answers that That answers question 3, and we're moving right along into the last question. This is the issue, right? Question 4, issue. Can big box be held liable for the entire amount of damages under the doctrine of joint and several liability? And you probably would want to have like a little bold header up there so that the person, right, everything, you're trying to make it as visually easy for the grader to give you points as possible. Here you're going to be discussing joint and several liability, so you might want to throw up a little bold joint and several liability issue. Can big box be held liable for the entire amount of damages under the doctrine of joint and several liability? Oh, bam. What's your rule? Issue rule. Joint and several liability. When 2 or more tortious acts combine to proximately cause an indivisible injury, each tortfeasor is liable to the plaintiff for the entire amount of damages. So bang, there's our rule for joint and several liability. I mean, that's a little bit fancy. You just want to basically remember that if you got 2 or more people that are, committing tortious acts, that are acting negligently, basically, and they combine to cause an indivisible injury, then they're both liable for the whole thing. All right. Proximate cause, we've got a rule here for intervening acts. A negligent defendant is liable for foreseeable intervening causes. All right, well, I guess, what does that mean? In negligent medical malpractice or negligent rescue, they are considered foreseeable risks created by the original negligence. So this is all kind of a fancy way of just saying, look, intervening acts, the original person, which is here big box, they had the cheesecake on the floor, they're going to be liable for the failed rescue attempt. So although, as we discussed above, the person who rescued is only going to be liable for the amount of damage that they contributed during the rescue, big box is on the hook for everything. They're the original tortfeasor. They left the cheesecake on the floor, and it is foreseeable that somebody would come and rescue and be negligent about it. So they are going to be liable not only for the kid's, injury when he slipped and fell on the cheesecake, but also the negligent idiot who came over and twisted the kid's arm or whatever. So big box is on the hook for everything. You go through the joint and several liability. When you got 2 or more people that are acting negligent for an indivisible injury, each person's on the hook for the entire amount. And the intervening acts rule, if a negligent defendant is liable for a negligent defendant is liable for foreseeable intervening causes like the rescue. So you've got these 2 rules, and it's worth noting that a defendant who pays the full amount may seek contribution from the other liable parties. That's something that you'd want to mention here. So big box may be held liable for the full amount, but as to the actual injury that the kid got from his arm, even though big box can be held liable for that, he can seek contribution from the idiot rescuer who twisted the child's arm. That's just saying, hey, you have to pay me for the amount that you caused in damage to the child when you screwed up the rescue act. So there's our rules. Joint and several liability. You've got proximate cause of the intervening act and contribution. We define those all out. There's our rule, and then we just apply it to the situation, which we kind of already have. But son's injury is likely treated as indivisible, right? Because the worsening of the injury was a foreseeable result of the initial fall caused by the cheesecake. So big box's negligence put the son in a position where he required help in the first place. The customer's negligent rescue does not cut off big box's liability. It looks like big box is probably going to be, under the applicable rules we just discussed, held liable for the full amount of the injury under joint and several liability. Our conclusion is going to be, yes, under the doctrine of joint and several liability, the son can recover the full amount of damages from big box. And then we may put in there, big box is liable, but they can seek contribution for the amount of damage caused by the negligent rescuer. And bam, we've gone over this whole hypo here. We've got our categories down: invitee, trespasser, licensee. We have to know all about those for the MBE and the essay questions. This did a pretty good job fleshing out all this tort stuff. We did a good job. We're going to pass the bar exam. We're torts ready. All right, good luck, everybody. Thanks for listening.